My name is Avery Bennett, and I was 25 years old the night my parents told an entire ballroom that I was lying about the wheelchair I had spent 2 years trapped in. My father's retirement gala was supposed to celebrate 40 years of success. Instead, it became the night his entire family collapsed. More than 100 guests sat beneath crystal chandeliers while waiters carried silver trays between tables covered in white linen. At the center of it all stood my father, Richard Bennett, founder of Bennett Logistics, the man everyone in our town respected, the man who taught me that reputation was everything. The same man who looked directly at me that night and publicly called me a liar. But that comes later. To understand what happened, you need to know who my family was before everything broke apart. I grew up believing we were the kind of family other people wished they had. My father built his trucking company from a single truck. My mother volunteered at every charity event in town. My older brother Ethan was the future of the business. And me? I was the daughter who never quite fit the picture. Not because I caused trouble, because I asked questions. Questions my family never liked. My father used to tell people I was too stubborn for my own good. My mother called me dramatic whenever I disagreed with her. And Ethan treated every disagreement like a competition he had to win. The older I got, the more I noticed something strange. In our family, the truth only mattered when it helped my father. If it didn't, the truth became negotiable. I didn't fully understand that lesson until the night everything changed. 2 years before the gala, I was finishing a late shift at a law office. I worked as a legal assistant. The pay wasn't amazing, but I loved the work. I loved facts, documents, evidence, things that couldn't change their stories. It was raining that night. The roads were nearly empty. I remember checking the clock in my car, 10:17 p.m. I remember a country song playing quietly through the speakers. I remember thinking about stopping for coffee before heading home. And I remember headlights, bright headlights, coming toward me much faster than they should have been. At first, I thought the truck was simply drifting across the center line. Then I realized it wasn't drifting. It was coming directly at me. I jerked the wheel. The truck swerved, metal exploded, glass shattered, and then everything disappeared. When I woke up 9 days later, I couldn't feel my legs. The first thing I saw was my mother's face. She was crying. The second thing I saw was my father standing beside her. The third thing I heard was a lie. "Avery," my father said softly, "you lost control of your car." Even through the fog of medication, something felt wrong. "No," I whispered. "There was a truck." My father immediately shook his head. "No, sweetheart. You hit a guardrail. There wasn't another vehicle." I tried to explain what I remembered, the headlights, the impact, the truck, but every time I mentioned it, someone changed the subject. At first, I assumed they were trying to protect me. Then weeks passed, then months, and the story never changed. There was no truck. There was no second driver. There was no investigation. According to everyone around me, I had simply lost control. The problem was, I knew what I remembered. People can doubt many things, but they know the difference between a dream and a collision. I remembered that collision. I remembered it every night, the headlights, the impact, the sound. I knew another vehicle had hit me, yet every official report somehow said otherwise. Every time I questioned it, my father became irritated. Every time I pushed harder, my mother became emotional. And Ethan? Ethan always became angry. That should have been my first clue. My brother hated discussing the accident, hated it. The moment anyone mentioned it, his entire body tensed, his jaw tightened, his mood changed. At the time, I thought he was upset because he hated seeing me in a wheelchair. I didn't realize there was another reason, a much darker reason. One afternoon, about 6 months after the crash, I attended a family barbecue. It was the first large gathering I'd gone to since leaving rehabilitation. I spent most of the afternoon listening to relatives tell me how brave I was. Then I overheard something. Two of my father's business partners were talking near the grill. One of them asked about the accident. Before I could answer, Ethan jumped in. "It was nobody's fault," he said quickly. "Avery just lost control." The speed of his response surprised me. The man hadn't even finished asking the question. Ethan answered like he'd rehearsed it, as if he'd been waiting, as if he needed everyone to hear exactly the same story. That was the first moment I felt genuine suspicion. Not grief, not confusion, suspicion. Later that night, I requested a copy of my accident report. When it arrived, I read every page. Then I read it again, and that's when I noticed the first inconsistency. The report described extensive damage to the driver's side of my vehicle, damage consistent with the side impact. But somehow the conclusion stated there was no evidence another vehicle had been involved. No explanation, no analysis, just a conclusion. It didn't make sense. And once I noticed that inconsistency, I started noticing others. Small things, missing photographs, incomplete notes, references to documents that weren't attached. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but the deeper I looked, the harder that became to believe. Then one afternoon, nearly a year after the crash, something happened that changed everything. I received a phone call. A man introduced himself as Harold Simmons. He was 78 years old, and he told me he had been driving behind me the night of the accident. My heart nearly stopped, because for the first time, someone else remembered the truck. For a moment, I couldn't speak. For nearly a year, everyone around me had insisted the truck existed only in my imagination. Now a complete stranger was telling me he had seen it too. His name was Harold Simmons. He told me he had been driving behind me the night of the accident. According to Harold, a dark pickup truck had been driving aggressively before the crash. As the road curved, the truck crossed into my lane and struck the driver's side of my car. Then it stopped briefly and drove away. My hands were shaking by the time he finished, because every detail matched the memory I'd been told to ignore. When I asked whether he had reported what he saw, Harold immediately said yes. He had given a statement to the responding officer that very night, a statement nobody had ever mentioned to me. Then he told me something even worse. A few weeks earlier, he had seen a photograph of my brother Ethan online, and the truck he remembered from the crash looked exactly like Ethan's. After the call ended, I couldn't stop thinking about it. At first, I wanted to believe Harold was mistaken, but once the idea entered my mind, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Ethan had always reacted strangely whenever the accident came up. He became defensive, angry, uncomfortable, almost frightened. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a coincidence. I started digging, quietly, carefully. Within days, I found something that made my stomach drop. 3 days after my accident, Ethan's truck had undergone major body repairs. The work included damage to the driver's side and a complete repaint. Even stranger, the repair had been paid entirely in cash. No insurance claim, no official report, nothing. I printed the records and added them to a file I had started building. Then I stopped asking questions publicly. At family dinners, I smiled. At holidays, I stayed quiet. And because I stopped pushing, my family became careless. One Sunday afternoon, I arrived early at my parents' house and overheard my father and Ethan talking inside my father's office. They didn't know I was there. I only caught part of the conversation, but it was enough. My father sounded frustrated. "This never should have gotten this far," Ethan answered immediately. "I told you the witness was handled." Witness. Not rumor, not accident. Witness. My pulse started racing. A moment later, my father said something I'll never forget. "We protected you." Protected. The word hit me harder than anything else, because innocent people don't usually need protection. I quietly backed away before they noticed me. Then I left without saying a word. Sitting alone in my car afterward, I finally admitted what I had been trying not to believe. The accident wasn't being hidden because of me. It was being hidden because of Ethan. That night, I opened a new file. Across the front, I wrote 3 words. What really happened? Inside went Harold's statement, the repair records, my notes, and every strange detail I could find. Over the following months, that file continued to grow, and eventually, it led me to a piece of evidence so devastating that even my mother could no longer pretend she didn't know the truth. The evidence was hidden inside a recording my family never knew existed. The recording came from the last place I expected, my mother's phone. A few months after I started gathering evidence, she accidentally left it at my apartment after a family dinner. Later that evening, the screen lit up with an unread voicemail notification. Normally, I would have ignored it, but one line caught my attention. Richard, we need to talk about Ethan. My father's name, my brother's name. I pressed play. The message was from my Aunt Susan, and within seconds, my entire world changed. Linda, please call me, she said. Then came the sentence that stopped my heart. I can't keep pretending Ethan wasn't driving that truck. I froze. The voicemail continued. Richard needs to stop acting like nothing happened. Somebody got hurt. Then one final sentence. I know he's your son, but Avery is your daughter too. The message ended. I listened to it 3 more times, not because I didn't understand it, because I did. My mother had heard that voicemail, which meant she knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to stop calling me confused. Enough to stop defending Ethan. Yet she never did. The next morning, I returned her phone and said nothing. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for her. That afternoon, I called Aunt Susan. The moment I mentioned the voicemail, she became quiet. Then she asked a single question. How much do you know? That was all the confirmation I needed. Susan eventually told me what she had been hiding for nearly 2 years. 3 days after my accident, she visited my parents' house. Everyone seemed nervous, especially Ethan. Later, she overheard an argument between him and my father. She couldn't hear everything, but she heard one sentence clearly. You left your sister there. Then Ethan responded. I panicked. Those 2 words stayed with her for years. I panicked. Not, I didn't do it. Not, you're wrong. I panicked. Susan later confronted my mother. My mother cried, but never denied Ethan's involvement. After that, my father shut the conversation down, and nobody spoke about it again. Until now. When I asked Susan why she stayed silent, her answer was simple. She was afraid of my father. Richard Bennett had spent decades building influence in our town. People depended on him. Businesses depended on him. And Susan feared what would happen if she challenged him publicly. When our conversation ended, I sat alone looking at the evidence file growing thicker on my desk. Harold's statement, the repair records, the conversation I overheard, Susan's testimony, and now the voicemail. The picture was becoming impossible to ignore. But I still lacked one thing. Proof. The kind of proof that survives lawyers, investigations, and courtrooms. Then, 6 weeks later, I found it, completely by accident, hidden inside a storage facility connected to my father's closest mechanic. And what I found there would prove not only that Ethan hit my car, but that my entire family had helped bury the truth. For almost 2 years, my father acted like the accident was something nobody could change. But people who truly want to move on don't spend years protecting secrets. The breakthrough came from a detail that seemed insignificant at first. While reviewing public business records, I noticed recurring payments connected to a storage facility. The payments were linked to one of my father's longtime mechanics, the same mechanic who had serviced Ethan's truck after my accident. Something about it felt wrong. The more I looked, the worse it became. A few days later, I learned that 3 days after my crash, my father and the mechanic had stored a damaged truck part inside that facility. A damaged fender. The timing alone was suspicious. By then, Daniel Harper and I had gathered enough evidence to move forward legally. Once access to the unit was obtained, everything changed. Inside, investigators found the damaged truck fender. Even after 2 years, traces of blue paint were still embedded in the metal. My car had been blue. That alone was devastating evidence, but it wasn't the worst thing inside. Attached to the fender was an old envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures taken immediately after my accident. Pictures showing Ethan's truck before repairs. And in multiple photographs, a streak of blue paint ran clearly across the damaged side of the vehicle. The truck that hit me. The truck my family claimed never existed. The truck Ethan had been driving. For nearly 2 years, they had called me confused. Meanwhile, physical evidence had been sitting in storage the entire time. But one photograph revealed something even worse. My mother. Standing beside the damaged truck less than 2 days after my accident. The timestamp was impossible to dispute. She hadn't learned the truth later. She had known almost from the beginning. That realization hurt more than finding the truck, because it destroyed the last excuse I still had for her. She wasn't unaware. She wasn't misled. She made a choice, and she chose Ethan. The evidence was now overwhelming. A witness statement, repair records, the hidden truck part, the photographs, the paint transfer. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Ethan hit my car. My father covered it up, and my mother helped protect them. The investigation quickly gained momentum, but my family had no idea. They still believed I had stopped asking questions. They still believed the truth was buried. Most importantly, my father was focused on something else. His retirement gala. The biggest event of his life. A celebration of his career, his reputation, and the legacy he wanted the town to remember. What he didn't know was that the same event was about to become the place where every lie finally came apart. The retirement gala was 3 weeks away. By then, my father had no idea how much evidence existed against him. As far as he knew, I had finally given up. Meanwhile, investigators continued building their case. The photographs from the storage unit had changed everything. They proved Ethan's truck had been involved. They proved my father had hidden evidence, and they proved my mother had known almost from the beginning. A few days before the gala, my mother unexpectedly visited my apartment. She looked exhausted. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, she finally asked, "Are you planning something?" The question told me everything. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about what I knew. Then I asked the question I had wanted answered for 2 years. "Did you know?" Her eyes filled with tears immediately. She never denied it. Instead, she whispered, "I was trying to keep the family together." The family. Not the truth. Not me. The family. I looked at her and said quietly, "The family ended the night Ethan hit my car." She cried. I didn't, because by then, I had already accepted who she really was. Before leaving, she stopped at the door and made one final request. "Please don't destroy your father." Then she walked away. Not once did she ask how to help me. Not once did she apologize. The gala arrived on a Saturday evening. More than 100 guests filled the ballroom. Business owners, employees, friends, community leaders. Everyone my father wanted to impress. I arrived alone and took a seat near the back of the room. Across the ballroom, Ethan laughed with guests and acted as though nothing had ever happened. The program began. Several speakers praised my father's career and accomplishments. Then my mother took the stage. At first, Her speech sounded harmless, but eventually she turned toward me. "We've all tried our best to support Avery," she said. Polite applause followed. Then she added, "The hardest part has been helping her accept what really happened." The room became quiet. Everyone understood what she meant. She was questioning me, again. Then my father joined her on stage and made things even worse. "Avery has always had a vivid imagination," he said with a small laugh. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed through the room. Then he looked directly at me and delivered the sentence that changed everything. "The truth is, Avery never stopped pretending there was another driver." The ballroom froze. 100 people listening, 100 people watching, and my own father had just publicly called me a liar. Across the room, I saw Ethan smiling, still confident, still convinced they controlled the story. I simply smiled back, because there was one thing they didn't know. The investigators had already arrived. And in less than 15 minutes, everything they had spent 2 years protecting was about to collapse. For a few seconds after my father finished speaking, the ballroom remained completely silent. 120 people, not a single voice, not a single fork touching a plate, not a single glass being lifted. The kind of silence that only happens when people sense something important is about to happen. My father mistook that silence for agreement. He smiled, confident, comfortable, still convinced he controlled the room. He had no idea the room no longer belonged to him. "Avery," he said from the stage, his voice carrying through the ballroom, "why don't we stop reliving old fantasies and focus on something positive tonight?" A few uneasy laughs scattered through the crowd. I didn't respond. I simply looked at him, calmly, the same calm that had terrified my family for months, because calm people are dangerous when they already know the outcome. My father shifted slightly, the smile weakened. Just a little. He felt it. Not the truth, the change. The room had stopped following him. People were watching me now, waiting, trying to understand why the woman being publicly humiliated looked completely unafraid. Then Ethan made the mistake that finally destroyed them. He stood up from his table, raised his champagne glass, and said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "Come on, Avery, don't start another one of your conspiracy theories." A few people laughed, far fewer than he expected. Most just stared. Because something about the situation felt wrong, very wrong. A man in his 30s mocking his sister in a wheelchair, a father publicly insulting his daughter, a mother standing silently beside them. Even before the truth arrived, the picture wasn't flattering. Ethan didn't notice. Bullies rarely do. He took another drink, then pointed toward me. "You've spent 2 years blaming everyone else for your own mistakes." The sentence echoed through the room. I saw several faces change, discomfort, shock, disapproval. Ethan saw none of it. He was too busy enjoying himself. My father tried to move the program forward, tried to regain control, but it was too late, because at that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. The sound wasn't dramatic. No music stopped. No spotlight appeared. Just 2 doors opening quietly. But somehow everyone noticed. Conversations faded. Heads turned. 3 people entered. 2 state investigators. And Daniel Harper, my attorney. My father's face changed instantly. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was recognition. The kind of recognition people have when they suddenly understand that a problem they thought was buried has found its way back to the surface. The investigators moved calmly, professionally. One of them spoke briefly to hotel security. Then they continued toward the center of the room, straight toward our family, straight toward the stage. The entire ballroom watched. My father stepped forward, trying to recover, trying to sound important, trying to sound in control. "Can I help you?" he asked. One investigator looked directly at him. "Richard Bennett?" The confidence vanished, not completely, but enough. Yes? The investigator nodded. We need to speak with you and Ethan Bennett. The room went silent again. This time nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away. Ethan lowered his glass. For the first time all evening, he looked worried. What is this? He asked. The investigator remained calm. We're following up on an active investigation regarding the accident involving Avery Bennett. The words hit the ballroom like a bomb. You could actually hear people inhale. Around the room, heads turned toward me, then toward Ethan, then toward my father, then back again. Nobody knew what to say, because suddenly the story my family had spent 2 years selling no longer matched reality. My father recovered first, or tried to. This is inappropriate. His voice was sharper now. This is a private family matter. The investigator didn't even blink. No, sir. It isn't. The answer landed hard, very hard, because everybody in the room heard it. The lie was no longer private. The cover-up was no longer private. Nothing was private anymore. Ethan stood abruptly. His chair scraped loudly across the floor. This is ridiculous. His voice cracked, just slightly, but everyone heard it. I didn't do anything. The investigator looked at him for a moment, then said something that made the color disappear from Ethan's face. That's not what the evidence suggests. The ballroom erupted into whispers. People leaned toward each other. Questions spread through the room. Confusion, shock, disbelief. And in the center of it all sat my father, completely still, because he finally understood. The evidence existed. Real evidence. Not rumors, not accusations. Evidence. The investigators continued. They didn't reveal everything. They didn't need to. They simply confirmed that new evidence had connected Ethan's vehicle to the crash, that multiple witness statements had been obtained, that physical evidence had been recovered, that additional parties were being investigated regarding obstruction and concealment. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Then something happened that nobody expected. My mother stood up, slowly, unsteadily. The entire room watched. She looked at Ethan, then at my father, then finally at me, and for the first time in 2 years, she stopped protecting them. Tears streamed down her face. I told you this would happen. Her voice barely carried, but the ballroom was so quiet everyone heard it. My father looked horrified. Linda. It wasn't a warning. It was fear. Real fear. The fear of a man watching his last line of defense disappear. My mother ignored him. She kept looking at me, and then she said the words I had waited 2 years to hear. Avery told the truth. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My father actually stumbled backward. Ethan looked like someone had punched him. My mother covered her mouth and cried. I knew. The words shattered whatever remained of the lie. I knew almost from the beginning. A gasp moved through the room. Several people openly stared at her. Others stared at my father. Others at Ethan. But everyone understood the same thing. The story was over. The truth had won. Not because I screamed. Not because I fought. Not because I exposed them. Because eventually lies become too heavy to carry, and someone always drops them. That night, it was my mother, and once she did, everything else came crashing down.